There's a lot going on in this movie.
It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I like this movie.
It has a special place in my heart.
Very close to my heart.
This was a good one.
I want to like this movie.
What? Seriously?
I loved it.
Very flat, kind of boring.
This movie blows me away. This movie turns me on.
Terrible. It is terrible. All these keys everywhere. Influences, baby.
Huge fan.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Hello out there in YouTube and podcast land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about horror movies and science fiction films and those key elements that often lift, but sometimes just separate things from the average genre fare. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're just memorable, sometimes both. If you're joining us today for the first time, or have maybe the second or third time, then you may know this. But if you don't know, to give you a brief synopsis, David and I have known each other for 40-something years. We've been talking horror movies and science fiction movies for a very long time. We decided when we wanted to do this podcast that we would cover the cinema industry in its entirety. So we look at films over the last 100 years. If you look at one of our seasons, you'll see a generous offering of movies from every decade. Sometimes we do a little more in one decade, like I think this season we're doing a little more in the 70s, but we do look at movies that came out in the 20s and the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. You guys coming back already know this, and that's why you're here. You like to hear what we have to say, and we're going to start saying it. I am here today with my good friend and co-host, David Horton. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. And we're going to start saying it. That needs to be our new tagline. We're going to start saying it. I'm good. Normally, we try to break the ice a little bit with what we've been doing in our genre week, or what genre-related things we've done that aren't the topic of today. And I actually kind of stumbled into your world, but it's a world that fascinates both of us, and it kind of does blend over everything. I watched a documentary, it's now on Prime, called The Frankenstein Complex. Have you watched that yet?
It's on Prime? No, I've not even heard of this.
It's called The Frankenstein Complex, and it fits perfectly for us. Came out in 21. It was, I didn't recognize the director. It was Alexandra Poncet and Giles Pinso. So I'm assuming almost Spanish. So this might be a Del Toro project. Anyway, it has interviews.
Oh, he is doing a Frankenstein movie. So
it has interviews with everybody. Del Toro, Rick Baker, Kevin Smith, even old stuff with makeup artists and Douglas Trumbull and all of it. It is amazing, but it basically deals with focusing on the relationship between movie monsters and the people who make them. So Stan Berman and a lot of the 80s studios. Stan Winston, and all of the ways monsters have been created. So it even goes back to Harryhausen, of course. But
awesome.
It's really a really tight documentary. It's really well done. You see so much of, one of my favorite parts was with Dennis Muren. So it was the whole coming of Jurassic Park and the fact that Dennis Muren had put 6-9 months of work into this project. And then these guys show up one night and show Steven this computer animated dinosaur they had done, and the whole project shifted. And it's got that great scene where you have Dennis Muren, who was so good at stop animation, and he was the new Harryhausen, he was the new guy and everything. And he said, I realized my whole career was over overnight. It was done.
Wow.
Because we wouldn't need that anymore. Luckily, Spielberg hired him on because these guys that were really good at the computer animation had no idea how a monster would move or an animal would move. And Dennis Muren was incredible with physiology and anatomy and the models and all of that. So he kind of worked with them. But it's a really cool part. It really made me, and I ended up looking at it afterwards, and then I'll stop, but they kept talking about The Thing and Rob Bottin and how it pushed makeup effects at that time. And not just makeup effects, the relationship with the creature. And it has Del Toro talking about the monster is in us. That was the whole thing about The Thing, and really made it so good. It wasn't just the effects being so assaultive and so amazing and just out of this world trippy. It was the fact that when we didn't have those effects, we're all looking at each other.
It's paranoia. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was really interesting, but it made me miss Rob Bottin really bad.
What's he doing?
Nothing. He's basically gotten out of the movie industry totally as of about the past, like probably 15, 20 years. He hasn't done anything. He worked for a while, but evidently he was so burned with some of the things that happened later on, like The Howling and some other stuff that he had and some challenges that he had. But then with computer animation, he thought that was totally the wrong way to go with monsters. And he just said,
that's the way, that's human nature, man. Everybody fights progress.
Oh yeah. Fight the technology.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I mean, I would think he could be a consultant still in special effects, and a lot of people still do practical effects. It's coming back now too.
It's starting to come back, but it's really interesting, and this kind of taps into that. Like I said, it came out in 21, so it kind of taps into the fact that more people are starting to do practical effects again, and lots of animatronics, and all of that. Even if they are using mocap to actually create the movement, and then the creature on stage or in front of the camera moves the way that your actor in the mocap suit is moving. So it's that kind of thing with servos and technology motors and all that. So it's really good. It's called the Frankenstein Complex. I really recommend it if you are into movie making, especially monster movie making and special effects.
Back to Rob Bottin, it does look like he stopped around 2000, but he did do 7 in the 90s, which was great makeup, and he did an episode of Game of Thrones in 2014. So
really?
Yeah, but it looks like he had stopped for a while. Maybe he's going to come back. That'd be a welcome.
It would be nice. I think he was a genius.
Yeah,
but
he was. A child genius, basically. He was a kid when he did The Thing, but he went on to do like RoboCop and things like that as well.
Yeah. Isn't our research on that, didn't it show that he basically started with Carpenter? He basically started with Fog or something. That's like his first intro.
He was one of the ghosts on Fog.
Yeah.
And
that's just because he had been doing the makeup and was there that day or was helping somebody out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, that's what I did. I watched a little documentary that was excellent.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'll have to look into that. Well, I went into one of my favorite subgenres, although it was definitely a different type movie than we have been talking about. It's a movie I caught on Shudder called Azrael, I guess is how you'd say that. Okay. Have you heard of this movie?
No, but I love the title.
Why?
It's just cool. It sounds like a demon. It sounds like Belial or Abaddon or one of the...
Okay, yeah. It's like an ancient name.
Yes.
This is a decent little horror movie, but it takes ambiguity to a whole nother level. It's post-apocalyptic, which is the subgenre I was talking about that I really, really like. Mm-hmm. But it's not quite a zombie film. However, there are monsters in it that are very similar to a zombie, which is okay in my book. They're just kind of black and burnt looking. It's directed by E.L. Katz. Don't know anything else he's directed except he directed episodes of Bly Manor for Flanagan. Okay. And he directed episodes of Channel Zero, which is that show I often tout as being a really good horror show that came from the Sci-Fi Network, I believe. It was written by Simon Barrett, who came from several of those VHS movies, which we've talked about. Those VHS movies seem to have spawned a lot of talent. He also wrote You're Next and Blair Witch, the reboot, so I recognize those as well. The cast is great. It's got Vic Carmen Sane. Samara Weaving is the lead. She was in Ready or Not, that one about the bride, the one that we always talk about that neither one of us have seen, about the bride that's trying to run for her life because the family's trying to kill her or whatever. I found out she is not Hugo Weaving's daughter. She is his niece.
Ah, okay.
But there is a relation and a resemblance. You can see it in her face.
Yeah.
And then it also stars Nathan Stewart Jarrett. Synopsis is: years after the apocalypse, a devout cult of mute zealots hunt down Azrael, a young woman who escaped her own imprisonment. So one of the unique things about this movie is there's very little dialogue in it.
Okay.
So you've got some kind of apocalypse went on. There's some weird religious cult, and then there's these wild-looking black zombie-like creatures in it. So it's very, very original. It only gets 71% on Rotten Tomatoes with 76 reviews. I would bump that up to an 80 because I was captivated the entire time I watched it. It was just one of those where you get sucked in because there's no dialogue, so you're forced to watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I did.
I looked it up, and Azrael is the canonical angel of death in Islam. So if that has any relevance to you had said ambiguous. Is that because they don't explain a lot?
Yeah, you're thrown into it. You don't really know much about what's going on at all.
Okay.
It's just, you know that they're after her, and you're like, why are they after her? And they have this weird little camp with this like church and this like priest, but the camp has like a really crude fence around it that's made up of like pallets and barbed wire and shit just to keep the zombies out, I guess, or whatever those things are. So, and they actually sacrifice people to the creatures as well. So it's not a run-of-the-mill zombie movie by any means.
No, with that title. Yeah, it says Azrael is one of the 4 archangels of Islamic culture, so the counterpoint to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Well, and I assume that symbolism has something to do with her character, because I think her character's name's Azrael.
Well, that would make sense.
So maybe
she's a reincarnated
going to deliver
demon.
the people from the evil cult or whatever. I don't know. So that's what I did in my genre week. And I don't know. You find a segue.
A segue out of that. Well, I talked about monsters and monster makeup, and you talked about black
Monsters.
Zombies, monsters. So there's monsters. It's a slight segue to today. Although I think as we'll discuss, the basic theme of our subtext of this movie today is not monsters. That's kind of not the gag. We are going to go all the way back to 2011. And the only film to be written and directed by J.J. Abrams solely himself. It was a coming-of-age pick. It's called Super 8. And written by J.J., of course, directed by J.J., stars Elle Fanning, A.J. McCalca, and Kyle Chandler. A brief synopsis is... we are following it's the summer of 1979. We're in a small town in Ohio, and we're following this group of friends, 4 boys and a girl. They are making their own short horror movie, and they're making it, of course, on the medium called Super 8, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, when we get into production. And they actually witness a very catastrophic train crash. And out of this train crash comes something, and they don't know what it is. But then people in town start disappearing, and things start being weird. And the army shows up, and they start doing their kind of black ops. We're taking over the town because for your own protection. One of the kids' father is a local deputy. And although they're having kind of a family crisis because he's kind of an absent dad and the mom just died, and they're dealing with the whole family dynamic. They also are trying to deal with maybe the army's lying to them, something's going on. Anyway, it ends up being a creature feature in the end, and then having a kind of unique, I'll say it that way, ending. Had you seen this movie before?
I had. I saw this movie shortly after it came out on DVD.
Okay. I think I remember seeing it in the theater, but that's vaguely. I just have a vague recollection of seeing it in the theater. That may be on a re-release, or it may have been when it originally came out. I don't know.
We would have seen movies like this in the theater in the 80s, because I know I went and saw Goonies in a theater, and I'm pretty sure I saw Explorers in a theater.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, what did you think of it then, and or what do you think of it now?
I have a hard time making up my mind about this movie.
Okay.
There's many reasons. One is that because of it is obviously an homage to movies like Goonies or Explorers, I was never a huge fan of those movies. So I like it as much as I like those movies, I guess.
Okay.
It's just a modern version. But it does, the one thing that bothers me in particular is that this movie seems rushed. It seems like it moves really fast at times. So,
but that's a JJ trait, though.
And then that brings me to the third component, is that I don't know that I've 100% loved anything J.J. Abrams has ever done.
Agreed.
Because there always seems to be something nagging at me, like there is something nagging at me about this film.
JJ is, to me, if you had a spectrum, and on the left over here you have the Spielbergs and the Del Toros and these incredible visionaries who also are really good storytellers. They're just, regardless of their medium or their photography style or whatever, they're just really good storytellers. And then way over here you got the Michael Bays and the Roland Emmerichs and the ones that are all spectacle, all big stuff, all marketing, all that. JJ's like 60% leaning toward the Michael Bay, in my opinion.
That's a very good description. It is.
I think that's where he
put
falls.
him on a time, like a scale.
Yes.
You've got the greats, the commercials, the greats and the commercials. He's somewhere in between. Yeah.
And he's known for this mystery box. That was his big deal. That was his big shtick. He even did a TED Talk on it and everything else. This whole thing of, we can create stories where because stories are more compelling if they have mysteries, whether that is personal interrelationship mysteries or plot mysteries or something like that. And you don't have to answer the questions. And I totally disagree with that amount of storytelling. I don't think you have to answer everything for everybody. You don't have to spoon feed people and go, but people who listen to us and watch this show and everything else know that we both love a great story well told. And to me, well told has satisfaction in it. Lost was this huge hit and everybody loved it. And by the end of it, they were all bitching because they didn't like the ending. But even before that, so many mysteries that had no resolution, no answers, nothing, just stuff for stuff's sake. And it's not even artistic enough to be like a David Lynch, where it's thrown in and you're shaking your head going, what did that mean? I don't know, but it was so cool, but I don't know what it meant. JJ's not that good, so he can't do that. So he replicates a lot of things. This was his first quote in an interview or one of the behind the scenes. He said, this was my first original screenplay. And I thought, I'd be really careful with that original.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot in this that's not at all.
No. And back to Lynch briefly, Lynch was an artist. Sometimes his stuff was there just for the visual. Yeah.
What is the line? You have to let art flow over you, you know?
And sometimes you questioned Lynch, but it was so beautiful you just didn't care, or so dark and creepy and weird you just didn't care. In this, you got a basic, solid story structure. So when you have a question, you want a legitimate answer. I
Yeah.
didn't like I have one of my biggest questions is about those little puzzle pieces. And I found out that they were explained in some on some website that you had to go to instead of really being explained more in the movie than they
Oh,
were.
I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense as a marketing ploy kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and
That's a
see,
very that's a
watching
very
it,
JJ thing.
yeah, and watching this movie 14 years later, nobody knows about that website or to go there and find out stuff that it's kind of like the little books they put out about Twin Peaks. Remember, you could buy those, Laura
Yeah.
Palmer's
I
diary
own
or
them all.
whatever. Yeah.
I have all of those. The cookbook, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just came up in conversation with someone last week where they went, "What was the big deal with Blair Witch Project?" I watched that movie and thought it was terrible. And how did it get popular? And I went, "Well, it was the website and the whole marketing campaign they did prior to it that made everybody think that this was a real story
Yeah.
and real found footage and everything else." But that's not around anymore. So
No.
it doesn't have the same hype. But JJ, so it got me thinking back on this. Okay, two things. One, overall opinion. I agree with you. I think this is a very flawed film, but there are things about it I really like. And a lot of that is very personal to me, too. So it kind of falls into that, regardless of the flaws, the personal stuff about it I really like, kind of thing, yada, yada. Anyway, but it got me thinking, where did JJ come from? Because suddenly he was freaking everywhere in the early 2000s. And basically, he's younger than us. Of course, he may be your age or around your age, but he's known for film and television. The man's had an amazing career. Film, television, huge franchises from Star Trek to Lost to Star Wars, of course. Worked on Armageddon, worked on Mission Impossible, has worked with literally everyone. One of his biggest collaborators is Simon Pegg, who is great. So it's bizarre that, and a lot of people were, when he first started, were calling him the new Spielberg, the new wonderkind who could greenlight a project and it was going to be great and whatever. But
He worked for
reemphasizing your
Spielberg when he
point,
was a kid.
reemphasizing your point, I can't think of really a movie by JJ that I really like, that I can
No.
say that's a great film.
No, I want to really like Star Trek, and there are elements of the Star Trek reboot that I do like, but it's not perfect by any means. And same with the Star Wars movie.
No, and it falls into his whole thing that you already mentioned about this, which is it's going from set piece to set piece to set piece without a lot of dialogue in between. At least this one has a couple of slow moments that work, that are character work.
It's
And I think-
primarily Fanning and that boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's just because that's him kind of giving into himself. That's the way he felt when he was that age. Because he's gone on the record saying that the biggest influence on this movie was 80s movies, like you said, and the fact that he wanted this homage to those movies and the way they made him feel. So that's kind of a huge key, but it's also what has structured this as opposed to Star Trek or Star Wars, his version, The Rise of Skywalker and Phantom Menace. Was that his return to Star Trek, Star Wars was Force Awakens.
who knows?
Force Awakens. But-
I have a question though. When we started, you said that this was the only movie he had written and directed. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay. Because I was going to say he's directed a lot. I just didn't know he didn't write those. And as you said,
And he's
Mission
written-
Impossible's in there as well.
He's written a lot too. He wrote Armageddon. He wrote Forever Young. He wrote Regarding Henry. So all of these early 90s films, he was the writer for them.
Some of those are like pretty good, if I remember right.
Yeah. Armageddon,
Forever
Armageddon
Young, was,
again.
was that the Mel Gibson one where he was disfigured?
Yep.
I seem
And
to
that had
remember
a-
liking that movie.
That was a great story. And I thought it worked. That would work. Regarding Henry, I like too. That's Harrison Ford with the brain shot.
So maybe they had a script doctor if there were problems.
Probably. I would highly think that. And then
Me too.
his third film was Armageddon, and that's where he met Michael Bay. And I'm sure that's where he learned all of these tricks.
And that's where he also didn't have to worry about plot holes.
Yep. Blow things up, move things around, doesn't matter. If it looks good, do it. And that
Yeah.
whole realm of filmmaking I just can't get behind at all.
I have a weird obsession with that movie. I just, for some reason, I think it's because when it was on DVD, it was one of the best movies you could watch on DVD at the time, as far as like effects and sound and stuff. I think that was one of the reasons I liked it so much, but it is a terrible movie.
Well, it also has
It's a
Bruce
guilty
Willis.
pleasure.
It also has Bruce Willis. Armageddon, to me, is kind of like Independence Day. They're both really good to watch popcorn, quote, movies.
Right.
But you have to turn your mind off. I can't do that often. I get really distracted by, well, what the hell? How did that happen? Or what's our phrase? What the hell is going on?
Right.
Which is what happens about 2/3 through this movie. Is you suddenly start going, what the hell is going on? Why are
no,
we
it happens before that. It happens with the train crash. The train crash is so out of this world crazy. I'm like, why did he do that?
Okay, I'll go there with you. That is one of my first watch notes is this is ridiculous. This is like Michael Bay doing a train crash.
It was.
And if you want a better train crash, look at The Fugitive. The Fugitive does a train crash and it looks realistic. This one,
The
cars
Fugitive
are
is a
going
good movie.
those cars are going 50 and 60 feet in the air and falling over. And the guy lives?
Yeah,
And it's only a pickup truck that stops it? What? This thing wouldn't happen. That crash wouldn't have happened.
That
if they
guy
had
would
hit
not
a
be
brick
alive.
Wall.
Yeah, that guy
no.
would not be alive to pull a gun on them by no means. That truck would have been obliterated. But
it's terrible.
I read in preparation for this, I was reading notes for research, and they said that it was all done intentionally because of it being from the perspective of the kids. And I was like, well, is this part of their movie? And then because I had not remembered it. And then when I went and watched the movie, I was like, this has got nothing to do with their movie. This actually happened. And he overplayed it like times 10 more, maybe.
Well, there's two great kind of behind the scenes docs you can watch on this. One of them is just JJ and Steven talking, because Steven Spielberg produced this movie. And it's them talking about their early years and about the movie and everything else. And in that same doc, he mentions, I wanted the biggest, craziest train wreck you could ever have because it's from the kids' perspective and everything to them would be bigger and louder and yada yada. And I was going, yeah, but you don't explain that in the movie.
No.
You don't then have them show up and there's only 3 cars that have turned over and they all go, I thought it was a lot bigger, didn't we? From my perspective last night or whatever, but they don't explain that. Instead, it goes on for, it seems like 20 freaking minutes and doesn't do anything. And yet, even though the entire building that A, these kids are underneath, and B, the camera is sitting on the porch of, blows up in huge pyrotechnic thing, the camera survives.
It's got the focus lens got knocked off.
Yeah, it got knocked off. We need to fix that. Yeah, we need to fix that. Yeah, but no, that was a terrible. I don't get the justification for saying it's from the kid's perspective. I think that's JJ.
I don't either, and that's why I was getting.
That's
why I wanted to mention it. I was like, why did he say that? It really has no merit at all. So anyway.
Well, and that's kind of the problem with this movie, I think, is there's focus shift in it that doesn't work. From a nice little kids comedy where they're all sitting around a table talking to each other to a really, really scary monster attack followed by a great big huge whatever set piece, then a little intimate makeup moment. So there's all these that it doesn't flow, like you said. It seems there are things where you're going, is something missing or is this editing too quick?
The whole adult dynamic is kind of something that takes you out of it. If they would have focused on the kids and maybe the military, very similar to Explorers, where the parents are just walking around in the background. You don't really see them that much.
Right.
But instead, you've got this whole subplot between Kyle Chandler and Ron Eldard. And I'm like, okay, that's a little distracting. I see what they're doing, but like you said, it's another whole storyline.
Yeah. What about scenes? You want to do good scenes and bad scenes? Because we can do both.
Well, my favorite scenes are going to be the scenes where they're making movies, obviously, especially the zombie movie.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree with you. And just as a personal note, what I said earlier about it's personal to me, I was these kids. And that's one of the reasons, A, why I was drawn to the movie, and B, why it still has a little bit of warmth for me despite all the stuff, because I understand all of that. I understand not having enough money to get the film developed. And nobody now understands that really unless you're our age and did that. But you could shoot.
I mean, we made Super 8 movies. We made,
I
made several with you, and you made several before we even knew each other.
Yeah, I made my first camera was a Brownie 8mm reel-to-reel wind-up camera. You wound it up between each take to shoot on 8mm before Super 8 was ever came out. And then Super 8 came out. It was really cool. And then Kodak, which is prominently product placed in this movie, Kodak came out with cartridges that were Super 8 that also had a sound stripe, and you could record, and now you are set. You can do anything now. And this was so far before video cameras and now phones and DSLRs that can shoot an HD 4K movie, everything. And there was such a process. You had to plan it. You had to get all your friends together. You had to shoot it. Then you had to take that film to a drugstore. They had to mail it off to Kodak, get it developed, bring it back. Sometimes that would be a week or later. You would get it back and realize that something went wrong with the camera, or something you didn't see, or there was a fly on the lens, and
or
all that has to be redone.
Steve fell off the roof.
Yeah, Steve fell off the roof. It was just such a process. And to do it, you had to really love making movies with your friends to do it. And that, I do think he captures in this.
Well, that's the whole thing that probably appeals to us the most is the nostalgia aspect.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So definitely. And get the camera set up. You put the film in, didn't you? No, not yet. Well, do it, man. And grab this and get this over here. We got to run right now. Although I do think the kid's weird to say production value, and then he turns the camera away from the train. I'd be shooting the train. That's what I would be. But it's L, so it's okay, I guess. Whatever. But yeah, one of my first favorite scenes is any scene where they're shooting the movie, and especially the ending after the credits where they show the movie.
The entire thing. Yeah, that was my favorite part of the movie, watching the movie that the kids made during the credits. Yes.
Yeah. My other two favorite scenes would be both the attacks. I think the gas station attack is really good. And suspenseful and well done. And it's that whole Jaws, don't show the monster attitude, which works. And also the bus attack, I think, is pretty terrifying. And you're kind of, it goes on even longer. So,
yeah. I will say that he overdoes it a bit with the jump scares in this movie. They're those jump scares with loud noise, and I don't like those. One or two carefully placed maybe, but when you have more than five, I'm like, oh, that's enough.
And that is a perfect example of JJ. If it looks good, cool, do it. We don't have to justify it. It's cool, do it. So like this cop who here's dogs that run past him, and you think, okay, what are they running from? I don't know. It's way behind him. But then he looks over, and suddenly there's this jump scare of this dumpster being thrown. So somehow this huge creature got from way back there where he was chasing the dogs or scaring the dogs to all the way around the side of the gas station to the back just in time to kick this thing out in front of him. It just didn't make sense. So a lot of that, like you said, is jump scare for jump scare's sake, without justification. But that and the bus scene, I like both the scenes, and I like the fact that we always like when the bad guy gets eaten by the monster, and that's always a good thing. So, although I do then get to the bad scenes, which are, oh wait, do you have other scenes you liked before I do?
Oh, no, you kind of mentioned them. I think most of the scenes that I really like are, like you said, with them making the movies. Like, I liked all the scenes with Elle Fanning, as she's great in it.
Yes.
And the kid she acts opposite the most is great in it too. So I was invested in them. So any scenes with them, especially when you start seeing a love interest develop, I liked. So
yeah, as far as non-Super 8 film related scenes, I did like the scene with him and her in the lead, where they're talking, and she has to confess to him that her dad didn't show up for work. That's why his mom died, because she filled in for him. If she hadn't been there, it probably would have been her father. That's a great scene. And the scene between the two boys when he's doing the whole thing about, the only reason I wanted her into it because I like her.
Right. And he said what hurt the most was that he knows that she likes him. Yeah, that's a good scene too. And
both
it's
of those
just
were
kids. It's all the kids.
Again, I think he was really distracted with what story do I want to tell? Do I want to tell this kid's point of view as opposed to an adult point of view of a crisis and a bad emotional relationship or death situation? Do I want to tell the special effects thing with an alien who wants to find his way home? Where did we heard that story before? Or do I want something that's very scary and these kids are the only people that can save the world?
With a bunch of unanswered questions.
Yeah. And a lot of obtuse, weird logic that doesn't work at all.
Why does this creature take them and like put them, but not kill people? He puts them in what I think of as like the alien's nest for breeding or whatever.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Elle Fanning is still alive. So is the military. Or is it the military guy? No.
The sheriff.
The sheriff. Yeah, exactly. And I'm like,
well, for a few minutes.
Why is it keeping them alive?
For a few minutes. And then he kills him. And that's what doesn't make sense either. I was going, okay, why does he kill some people and not kill other ones? He abducts some and kills them.
Exactly. That's my point. And I guess they tried to get that across when he grabs, what is the main kid's name? I cannot think of his name. Joe. When he grabs Joe and says, and Joe says, not everybody is bad, blah, blah, blah. And he convinces the creature. So does the creature already know that? And that's why he's not killing some of the other people? It just didn't make any sense.
Well, again, holes, because if it's nice people, so instead of eating people that are bad, if they're nice, he just abducts them and he's going to keep them asleep until he can escape, maybe. And so that's why the Elle Fanning character and the other waitress lady, and that's why they're still alive. But then why the sheriff? Because the sheriff might have been good, but then you eat him. And so what, he was good or he wasn't good? I don't understand why. It was just, that was, the last third of this falls into my list of bad scenes. Because there's so many all in a row that don't make sense, that I don't. The train wreck was one early on. But then you get into weird stuff like, okay, the lead kid, I've got his notes here. The lead kid is Joel. Is that the lead?
Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe. He goes to his mom's grave and he's sitting there at night and he hears the noise coming from the garage. And later on, that's the hole they go into to get down and find out where the monster is, right? And I'm thinking, how did the monster get there in the first place? He didn't open the garage doors and nothing's open or torn or destroyed. Did he just dig a hole and then go back in it? Just silly stuff that didn't matter. And the whole thing of, we've set this creature up as dangerous. And then about halfway through, we see this videotape of the school teacher who caused the wreck to begin with in order to free the creature, we guess, sort of, although that's a weird way to do it. And his videotapes show that he had a psychic bond with the creature, and the creature wasn't hostile, it just wanted to go home. So he's freeing it so it can go home. So this scary monster we've had the whole movie is now suddenly supposed to be empathetic to us. And that, to me, never worked.
All it did was change its lenses on its eyes.
Instead of
It went
squinting,
from mean lens to E.T.
to
lens or whatever.
anime lens, happy
Yeah.
lens. Yeah. So yeah, none of the ending of this works. And the ending itself is so abrupt. It's just like, and it's gone and we're done. There's no denouement. There's no,
Well, the
wow.
denouement is the kid film, basically.
Yeah. But even if what's his name had said, did anybody film that? That would have been a nice little
Tag.
final thing, production value or whatever. But no, they didn't, and they don't. And other things don't make sense. We set up the military as these nefarious, dark, we'll need to know basis, and we're taking over everything. Yet let's just let these kids film in front of our tank outside this building, outside the house. We're going to let all these kids set up and just shoot us. I was going, what is going? No. Never mind. What the hell's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are scenes. Good, bad, and different.
Yeah. I can move on to cast real quick if you want.
Sure. Yep.
It is a modern movie, so most of these people you are going to be familiar with, except for the kids who, other than Elle Fanning, I'm not familiar with any of these kids. Elle is sister to Dakota, who is a little bit more famous and in Spielberg movies, including War of the Worlds, which we saw. I didn't realize that they're from Conyers, Georgia.
There you go.
My dad built houses in the 70s in Conyers, Georgia. I grew up in Stone Mountain, very near there. And someone else is from there, too. I think it's the guy, Jack McBrayer, the guy that played Kenneth on 30 Rock. He's from there, too. Anyway, Joel Courtney played Joe. We mentioned him. They are the two strongest kids in this movie, I would say. Other kids in it were Riley Griffiths, Ryan Lee, Gabriel Basso, Zach Mills. Next up would be Kyle Chandler, who plays Joe's dad. We know him mostly probably from Friday Night Lights. Or is that how you say it? Yeah, Friday Night Lights. Yep. I never watched that show, but I know how popular it was, and I know that's why people know who he is. However, he's done movies too. He was in Argo and The Wolf of Wall Street, and both those were not Oscar nominees. So he's done.
I think he's very underrated. He's a really good actor, I think. Mm-hmm. I like Kyle Chandler.
Yeah, I liked him too. Mm-hmm. I liked first, before I move on, somebody had to decline accepting this role in order to star in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Do you know who that was?
Simon Pegg. No, I don't know.
Jeremy Renner.
Oh, that would have been a good choice too.
Jeremy would have been a good choice for this as well. Mm-hmm. The person that surprised me the most, because I hadn't seen him in so long, was Ron Eldard, who played Lewis, the guy who basically was responsible for Joe's mother dying at the plant for calling in sick that day. He was in ER back when it first came on. He was an ambulance driver and a love interest of Juliana Margulies, really before Doug, which was the George Clooney character. So I remembered him from the early 90s. Okay. I don't see him much now, though. He was in Black Hawk Down. That's the latest thing of note that I saw that he was in. Okay. And that's not a new movie at all. Oh, wow. A.J. McChalka played Jen Kasnick. I guess that was the mother. And Joel McKinnon Miller played Mr. Kasnick. And I recognized from Big Love, the show with, won't you put her in charge? Bill Paxton. I could not think of his name. Yeah, I watched all of that show on HBO. That was a great show. And he had a prominent spot on it. So I recognized. He's the father of the filmmaker. The big guy. They're both heavy. Okay. The father's heavy and the son's heavy. Yeah. Yeah. He's got like a flat top haircut. Noel Emmerich played Colonel Nellick. That was another familiar face to me. He's the bad guy in this movie. He was also in the last 2 episodes of the first season of The Walking Dead. He was the scientist that was left at the CDC in Atlanta and ends up blowing up the CDC. So for those
he's the one that says we knew it was coming or whatever, or maybe I'm working on a virus.
And one of them stays with him to die, and the rest of them leave.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the gang, from the very first season. He was the bad. Well, he was kind of a bad guy in a way, but he was definitely memorable. Richard T. Jones played Overmeyer. He was in Event Horizon. I think that's the guy that was in the pickup truck.
No,
Bruce
that's Glenn
Green-
Turman. Glenn Turman was the pickup truck because he's also in Gremlins.
Oh, okay. But I think, but isn't Richard T. Jones African American too? I think he is.
He is. Yeah,
Okay.
but Glenn Turman plays the professor, Dr. Woodward or whatever.
The one
doctor.
that should have died and lived somehow. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Bruce Greenwood, who we know very well from Mike Flanagan, played the alien.
Yes. Mocap.
I thought
he was
that
the
blew
monster.
my mind.
Yeah. That was a trivia I was going to throw at you, but you got it already, so it's good. Yeah.
Was it like a Andy Serkis thing where it was motion capture?
Yep. It was all mocap. Yep.
How funny. Anyway, that blew my mind. Bruce Greenwood's a very accomplished actor. You can see him in a lot of more recent Mike Flanagan stuff. Dan Castellaneta played Izzy. You know who that is, right?
I do know who that is, but who is Izzy? I don't know who Izzy was.
Oh.
Because that's Homer Simpson, right?
It is. It's Homer Simpson. You're right. I don't know who Izzy was either now that you mention it.
Okay, I guess he's one of the people.
Looking, because for some reason, the casting on IMDb is all screwed up now, and I have to go to Wikipedia, and they don't show pictures. Izzy... Well, I don't see Izzy, so must have been a very small character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see an Izzy listed.
Okay.
All right. If I come across it again, I'll come back. Sorry, folks. And Dale Dickey's in it too, as Edie.
Yep.
Do you remember seeing Dale? I don't remember seeing Dale.
Oh, yeah. She was the owner of the gas station. So the next morning when the deputy, the father, shows up, she's the one that comes out going, look at all this mess and blah, 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 blah. That's Dale.
Right.
Yeah.
And she's
I
from
went to school with
Knoxville.
her.
Yeah, she's from Knoxville, and that's funny. The people from Conyers, Georgia, and Knoxville, Tennessee in this movie, and we both have relations to those places. As far as awards, the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror nominated it for 8 Saturn Awards, including Best Sci-Fi Film, Best Performance by a Younger Actor, both Courtney and Fanning, Director, and Writing. I thought it was more, maybe it was only 6. I thought it was 8. Anyway, Courtney won, and so did... Oh, it was also nominated for music. Somehow I didn't get this in here, or I pasted it somewhere else, but it won for music as well. Because his name is like Giacchino, I think is his name. And it is not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list, which I get totally.
I have some trivia before we jump onto the keys. Let me see if I can find those.
I don't have a hell of a lot of keys, but I have some.
One of the ones was, you mentioned Giacchino, who is the composer. I actually worked with him on one project when I was at Disney, so I've got a tie to him too. But he, in one of the interviews, was saying this was his childhood as well. He loved scoring this movie, mostly because when he was growing up, he was so influenced by Steven Spielberg and John Williams. So he has said that as a key to him doing this. This guy's got cred too. It's not that I think he's the best composer out there, but I think he's really good. He's done a lot of Pixar. So he did The Incredibles and Ratatouille and
I love that movie.
Right. He did Fringe, which I love that theme song. He did Star Trek, the reboot. And I often listen to that theme because although I didn't like the reboot, I do like the theme. I think the theme is really strong in that. And of course, he did Lost. So some of those he did with JJ, some of those he's done with other people. But a really good composer for this. And several people, if you listen to reviews, say, oh, I love this soundtrack. I listened to it. I couldn't hum you one thing from this soundtrack. So
me either. I couldn't.
I didn't get that or get the whole thing of it's a great soundtrack from it, really. Not really.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Oh, I found what I pasted. There were actually 8 nominations for the Saturn Awards. The others were editing, special effects, and music, which I just mentioned. And it won for music, and that Courtney guy won for Best Young Actor.
Yeah, he was good. And that's a good segue because doing research, turns out that they said they auditioned over 5,000 kids for this role.
That's insane.
Because JJ was adamant that he didn't want recognition. He wanted new faces. He wanted kids who had not been, as he put it, around a lot. He didn't want them to know how the filmmaking process worked. The only real delineation of that was Elle, because when she first read, she was amazing. And he said, okay, she's it, no matter what.
But was she around that much yet? I know
No,
Dakota was.
This was early in her career. No, well, Elle's older than Dakota. So this was early in her career.
Okay.
Yeah, Dakota is the younger sister.
I did not realize that, but Dakota is the more famous one.
Yes. Well, yeah, because Elle went more into modeling and that for a while before she got really into film and has been ever since. But the thing about Joel, which is interesting with his career, like you just said, he went on and won a Saturn Award and all of that. This was the very first audition he had ever been to. He didn't even know how to audition or what the process was. And during this audition process, he had 14 auditions for the role.
He's still acting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. I've got trivia that it was filmed in West Virginia near Pittsburgh.
I saw that.
We know somebody else who came from Pittsburgh who did pretty good. So that's a good thing.
To Rogers.
I have a quote that says from JJ saying, I never intended this to be an homage to Steven, but instead an homage to that time in my life, which was so influenced by him. And I think that's just marketing rhetoric.
I think that's a lie.
I think this is, I would call this the dark E.T. because that's kind of what it is in base. And then what else? I think I have two other little trivias.
Elle Fanning has done a lot. I was just looking at her list of movies.
Yeah.
So she's just more, I just didn't realize. Well, I don't know. I have a trivia.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, maybe in relation to what you were going to say as far as about J.J. Abrams. I read that he was hired as a kid to, like, remaster or transfer Spielberg's Super 8 movies.
Yes.
From when Spielberg was a kid. Yes.
He and his friend had a side business when he was 16 years old, and they would transfer and actually repair home movies. So ones that had gotten cut, or if they would edit them, they would splice them, and then they would help transfer them, repair them, not transfer them, but repair them. And his mother brought him a box and said, this is from this guy named Steven Spielberg. And he had all of his home movies with his mom and all of that. And that was his first connection to Spielberg.
We've read other things with other movies we've covered where Abrams was somehow involved when he was a teenager, like behind the scenes and stuff.
Well, his father worked in television. His father was like a big television producer or something, even when they were in New York. And when they all moved to California, I think his father was, I think it said his father, let me check my notes real quick, but his father was still worked in television. His mother was was a screenwriter. No, his sister. His sister was a screenwriter. His father was a Peabody Award-winning television executive, and his mother was a real estate agent.
So he grew up in the biz.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Highly grew up in the business with the connections. And then the only other trivia thing I have was another quote that JJ said. He said, he said, this is my only original movie. Everything else I've done is remakes or sequels. I thought that was interesting. And he also said, this is supposed to be a movie made by film fans for film fans. And if that was his intent, I don't think he hit that either as well as he could have. It would have been a lot better to somehow have the movie become a integral part of the story.
I agree more with the latter than I do the former.
Almost like the tape in Brainstorm, how it became such a focal point for the story. It would have been interesting if what they had shot, the military had to get their hands on and were making it bigger and somehow part of the plot, but they didn't do that. I also have in my watch notes that it's so weird that they have this huge action set piece with literally the army blowing up this entire subdivision with tanks and guns and flamethrowers and everything. And yet 10 minutes later, the monster is down in the cave with them. And I was going, what were they shooting at to begin with?
Right.
Why were they blowing up the town?
Yeah.
So,
And that car chase is crazy too, where she's going through the fences and stuff.
Oh, yeah, in the car that somehow did not get hurt at all during the train wreck.
Yeah, and it looked like it had flat tires to me. I was like, did she really get in that car and take off? And then they're like riding through suburbia and just plowing through fences and people and almost hitting people that are cooking out and stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute, wasn't it just nighttime?
How not to do a car chase.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird.
And then the monster showing up at all the weird opportunities to show up, which is just script armor kind of thing. Like, Dad has just been abusing you. You get on your bike, you run away, Dad chases you down, and you're kidnapped right in front of him, and he can't do anything. The monster just happens to be there to kidnap you. All the kids and the bad guy are on the bus, and the monster just happens to attack the bus.
Yeah.
It's like, if earlier on Joel had maybe touched the creature and you had had that kind of connection and maybe make it that ET thing. And so the monsters are kind of always trying to protect him when it can. That would have worked as an element too, but not in here. So,
yeah. Script doctor.
Anyway, speaking of Elliot, the first key to this, ET.
Well, before we get to keys, I had one other trivia that you alluded to, and that's the fact that they did try to get George Romero to be in this movie because they're filming a zombie movie. They were near Pittsburgh, but apparently he was out of town, so they couldn't get him. And that would have been fun.
That would have been
a fun thing, yeah.
I would like to see them expand and do the freaking movie. I liked their movie.
The zombie movie,
really good. Yeah,
it was great.
It was good. It was scary. It was interesting. I loved some of the acting. It was really good. It was nice.
Well, you mentioned keys. E.T. definitely a big key.
Yep.
Where they would get on their bikes and go run do something.
Definitely.
I mentioned Goonies and Explorers, which I guess are the two biggest 80s kid movies, or at least the hit kid movies that I can think of. I have one that you may not have, and then really I don't have anything else that's not predictable. I have The Thing.
Okay.
And do you know why?
I do not.
It's because that creature's trying to build a spaceship out of a bunch of different crazy parts.
Very good. You could do The Thing, or you could do the original story. Same thing. Yeah.
The original story. Oh,
the original short story. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. I hadn't gotten that, but that's a really good one.
Because like electronic devices, and see, that's another huge question I have, is if these little pieces were parts of the ship just disassembled, then why did they need all the electronic stuff on the water tower? I don't understand that at all.
What was it doing to begin with? And why does it only take some of the rifles and not the other ones? And why aren't the cars moving and being magnetized? It's just...
And is it hydropower? Did it need the water for fuel? I don't get it at all.
Selective storytelling just for effect, and it didn't work. Plus the fact that one review I saw said, plus the fact you have to remember that everybody in those streets will be murdered instantly after this because they've seen too much. And the army will have to kill all of them. And that's the other thing, too. I would have given that at the very end. I would have had, like, what's his name, the director guy filming it, like, through his armpit or something, or in a backpack. He's actually had film of it. Again, it would be a good rewrite for this. I had several that are, of course, like to you, obvious, and are those coming of age things, like Explorers, like Stand By Me, It, all the ones with kids who know a secret that nobody else in town knows, and they're trying to save everybody.
I had It as well.
Gremlins, the same way. And this has a very Gremlins-y kind of look to it, too. It kind of feels
it's also scary in places. So
correct.
Which is
scary, funny, and kids. So that works. I've got Stand By Me, except it's an alien instead of a dead body that they know about, nobody else knows about. Definitely homage to the creators of Stephen King and Steven Spielberg. So both the Stevens are part of this. Jaws, because of the whole philosophy of don't show too much of the creature too soon, which works all the way through this. I think that is one thing he does do well, is we only get glimpses of this creature. And then that leads to my next key, which is Cloverfield, because this creature reminded me of the baby version of the Cloverfield creature.
Yeah, and Cloverfield is a direct connection, even though he says it's not. Yeah.
Oh, I think this would be the birth of the Cloverfield monster.
Right.
Because for some reason he loves that multi-appendage design with a weird head with strange teeth. I'd mentioned The Fugitive. The other thing that came up, and it's kind of a trivia, but also a key, Greatest Show on Earth. The Greatest Show on Earth has that huge train crash in it as part of the story. Oh my God,
I haven't seen that movie in forever. Yes, you're right.
And
Charlton Heston and Jimmy Stewart.
Yep. And in that interview, Spielberg, AJ said, well, another reason for the train wreck was for you, Stephen, because of Greatest Show. And he said, yeah, that was the first movie I ever saw in a theater. And that's the movie that made me fall in love with what movies could do. And so that's a huge tie-in key to Spielberg and his youth and everything else.
Yeah.
And then the last one I have is Independence Day, because it's telepathic aliens. When they touch you, they somehow link with you and talk to you and whatever. He just didn't hold up a dead Data and make him talk.
Yeah. JJ himself said he took inspiration from Close Encounters because of the messy homes.
Oh, yeah. And also Close Encounters, the whole scene with the lineman.
The railroad track, huh?
The lineman, remember the guy who's repairing the line?
Oh, yeah.
In the bucket truck? And then
I was thinking about the truck at the railroad tracks, but yeah.
Well, that too, yeah.
Okay.
I think when he shows the scene with the lineman, or it has to be the lineman, because we were focused on the kids during the train crash or before it, but he does that whole big long shot of showing the whole town or the whole countryside and the little truck going along, just like Dreyfus in Close Encounters.
Yeah,
there's a lot of unoriginal to this, as much as JJ says it's his only original movie.
Yeah, I disagree with that totally. I think all of his movies are derivative, especially the ones that are part of franchises that already exist.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to do it. That is David and my opinion of Super 8, and I'm not sure that it's a coherent one. We don't love it. We don't hate it. We kind of fall on that line like J.J. Abrams does, probably, where we want to like it, but it's just not there.
Yep. I completely agree. I think that's a good take on it. There's some wonderful little pieces to it, but overall it's not good storytelling, it's not good filmmaking, and it kind of doesn't deserve to be on the 100.
It relies on special effects and spectacle to carry it, I think.
And it shouldn't. It should have been a more intimate story.
It should have been, especially with the kids. All right. Well, that's what we think. We want to know what you think. Did you like this movie? Do you now hate David and I because we totally dissected it? I guess. Let us know. And if you're looking for more of us out there, you can find shorter shows out there on YouTube. Or if you really want to help support us because you like what you hear, we do have a Patreon that is either subscription-based or free. We've got both over there, including additional shows on Star Trek and the X-Files. That's where we do our television stuff. And until next week, when we're going to be back in Horrorland, I teased last week that it was a horror movie you had chose, and then I forgot we were doing a sci-fi first. So the horror movie that David chose is coming up next week.
Yeah, it is.
And we'll be seeing you then.
All right. See you, Tim.
Right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
start the car. Johnny has the keys.